there is a direct correlation between overachievers and past trauma. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, I believe that.
Yes.
Makes sense.
So,
Keep going. Keep going.
and past traumas can exacerbate chronic pain levels. So that's been proven. So as far as a multidisciplinary approach, I think one of the most important aspects of that is pain psychology.
Welcome to the What I Meant to Say podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Jones, founder of Be Better Media and a mom of 4, passionate about human connection. Throughout my journey, I have experienced many What I Meant to Say moments, but since life doesn't give us do-overs, I've created a space to reflect and tell our stories again with a little more grace for ourselves and the hope that we can help others and be better for having listened. Welcome to the What I Meant to Say podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Jones, and I'm here today with Micaela Bensko of Veterans in Pain, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with her today about health and healing. And really excited to dig into her story about how she has used some really big challenges in her life to elevate the experience for veterans who are struggling with their own health experiences. So Micaela, thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm just really excited to share your story because it was so inspiring when I saw your YouTube video and your origin story. So, I mean, I'd love to start there. Can you tell me?
Thank you so much. Sure. No, thank you so much for having me, by the way. I love your mission. I love everything you're doing. So I'm excited to be a part of it and spreading the love and the healing, so to speak. To preface my story, I should begin with the fact my mother's Maggie Lockridge. She was an RN in the Air Force, and years ago she founded. It'll all make sense. She founded a post-operative plastic surgery recovery facility in Beverly Hills for movie stars and A-listers and kings and queens, and they all flew in from Dubai, and I mean that kind of place, like right in Beverly Hills. And she did that for 18,000 patient nights for 18 years, and finally sold it, retired, went to Palm Springs, and she's supposed to be retired. And she was watching a Bob Woodruff special, and he was discussing, and what she noticed was how our veterans were getting mechanically treated and functional and then discharged, but the aesthetics really weren't being addressed. And so, you have these incredible young men and women who served our country and end up with, scars or shrapnel wounds or completely obliterated jaws, missing eyes, these kinds of things. And they weren't being addressed at the time. This was 2007, 2008. So also right during the influx, right? And she's sitting there and she's thinking, I have this amazing network of how many physicians that are plastic surgeons and reconstructive specialists. So why don't I, within 2 weeks, she started from her garage Rebuilding America's Warriors. And that provides free reconstructive surgery to troops wounded in combat, 9/11 forward. And so I joined then as vice president and was for many years. And we built a volunteer physician network of almost 450 doctors, volunteer doctors around the country in all 50 states, and facilitated over 1,000 procedures for veterans. And then in 2011, the tables kind of flipped, and I had my own accident, and it happened to be in my driveway. I had a pretty sensitive spine for years from a car accident when I was in college, but I was always moving. I was always moving forward. I was a photographer. I was a destination wedding photographer. I traveled the world doing that, and I figured, well, I have my career and I'm doing this thing. And I was in my driveway, and the electric tailgate, as I was unloading groceries from the back of my car, I pushed the button, it came down, and I was standing up from getting my last bag of groceries. The corner of it lodged in the temple of my head, and I went down. It inverted my cervical spine and also blew out with very fragile areas of my lower spine that were like the eggshell theory, it takes that last little crack and then the eggshell's broken. Well, that was pretty much me. And long story short, I ended up with over 20 spine surgeries and procedures. And I was in bed for 6 years, over 90% of the time, because I'd also developed what is very common in our veteran community. You can come down with this. It's an autoimmune disease within your spinal cord that can be caused by one puncture to the dura of your spinal cord, of the lining. And so a woman can go in to have a baby and have her very first epidural. And within 2 weeks, you start to lose the use of your legs, and you can end up with horrific contractions within your spinal cord, just like labor contractions. So I had all these injections into my spinal cord, and it's called arachnoiditis. So it's an autoimmune response where the body feels as though there's an invasion of some kind, which is the injection into the dura. Mm-hmm. And the result is it starts to protect itself, quote unquote, with plaque around the nerves within the dura, and they harden, and it continues. It is called a suicide disease. The other disease I had developed was complex regional pain syndrome, CRPS, in my spinal cord. And that's another chronic pain disease that is called a suicide disease. You literally feel as though that particular part of your body is on fire. It's caused by a surgery or an injury. You could just bump your elbow and come down with CRPS in your elbow, and it can spread throughout your body. There's no cure. Again, I'm using quotes, no cure. And they usually say by the time you have the diagnosis of arachnoiditis, they give you 10 to 15 years. And it is considered a terminal illness in the sense that people usually take themselves out or commit suicide in that they, get into a fetal position and they can't take it anymore. It's the kind of pain that you cannot explain to anybody, except if you have had a child and have been through childbirth. Those are the types of contractions that were in my cord. So anytime I would put any pressure on my tailbone, I'd sit for 2 minutes, if that long, these contractions would start. And then they would come back cyclically and every 10 to 15 minutes around the clock. So that's why I was in bed for so long. I was in a wheelchair for 8.5 years. In 2017, so that was 2011, and I was in a wheelchair a little longer after this, but the crux of the story is that in June 28th, 2017, I kind of called that my own alive day, or my own birthday, my new birthday. A friend of mine had told me that also suffered from arachnoiditis, and I was helping her pick out a wheelchair. And so she told me, I heard about this stem cell procedure, and it's this doctor in Scottsdale is doing it, and I don't know a lot about it, but I've heard great things. So I'm thinking in my head, well, that's snake oil. With all I've been through, I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna watch. It was $24,000. Within 48 hours of her treatment, which was an adipose-derived stem cell treatment, meaning it's a mini liposuction procedure. What's that? Just liposuction. They extract the adipose or fatty tissue. And then from that, they put it through a centrifuge and extract adipose-derived stem cells. And it's an IV procedure. You can no longer obtain these in the States because of FDA regulations. They really clamped down, but they are provided outside of the country. In any case, within 48 hours, she could move the toes in her left foot. She hadn't moved in 13 years. And within 6 weeks, she was walking her son to school.
Oh my gosh.
I'm in. Okay.
Yeah.
My husband and I went out there with our kids, and I had my procedure done. That was June 28th. And overnight, by the very next day, my spinal contractions were gone. Completely gone. And over the period of a year, I learned how to walk again. I obtained the use of my legs again. I could sit through dinner and a movie with my husband again. I had a quality of life that nobody said was possible, that had never been heard of before. And having worked with my mother for so many years with the RAW program, with Rebuilding America's Warriors. And there was a group of veterans during my challenge, about 5 of them who were there for me during that period of time. And we compared notes, so to speak, when it comes to chronic pain and how some of the surgeries that they'd been through caused these conditions themselves, and that there was virtually nothing available for them through the VA system. Now we work with the VA system. We get referrals from the VA system and their administrators and facilitators. So there's very good facilities out there. However, as far as the VA in general goes, they have pain management, right? But it's almost completely prescriptive in nature. And there's no understanding or official designation of chronic pain as the systemic autoimmune disease of the central nervous system that it is. So unless you're addressing the soft tissue inflammatory aspect of chronic pain, which is what regenerative medicine does, or combining a multidisciplinary approach for chronic pain, which can mean a multitude of things, but primarily physical therapy, neurobiofeedback, soft tissue therapy, peptides, hyperbaric therapy is huge when it comes to, the treatment of TBI, PTSD, chronic pain. Well, none of these things were readily available or accessible. And the majority of the approvals for veterans trying to obtain these solutions are denied because they are done by administrative personnel that had never met the veteran. So, longer story short, 2018, it was so obvious to me. It was so clear that we needed to create a network of regenerative specialists for our veterans suffering from chronic pain, to empower our veterans through accessible solutions. So our veterans, our physicians that volunteer in our network, they're across the country, and our VIP physicians are across the country, and they volunteer their services, they volunteer their consultation, and then there may be hard costs involved. So that's where we need support, and we need donations to be able to cover the hard costs of these procedures. Because if we don't have the funding, then our veterans, even though it's like an 80% discount of usual and customary, again, making these accessible, sometimes it's pro bono, but without that, then our veterans are responsible for those costs. But that's what we're doing now. And we've facilitated I stopped counting, $4 million worth of value of services so far. And over 450 veterans have been through our program. And so that's the story. And that's where we're at. So now I'm 100% out of the wheelchair. I still struggle. I still have issues that I deal with on a daily basis. There's never a guarantee of 100%, and we don't ever promise anything. I've lived it much too long to know that an increase in quality of life, the vets that come to us, they're just like, give me 10%. They're like I was, give me 10% improvement in quality of life. I'll take it. I will run. I'll be so happy. And on average, we're seeing 30 to 40%, if not more.
Wow. I mean, there's such a commentary on perspective there, right? I mean, and the chronic pain is something that I've dipped my toe into, and it was a back injury, and I've never felt anything, and mine pales in comparison to anything you've described. So what it does to your nervous system and to your mind, and that ability to live any semblance of a normal life, and for the guys that have served and done so much for our country to come back and have that disconnect between the administration and what they're experiencing every day. It's inspiring to see what you guys are doing. And what I love about the story you just told is that generational connection between what you learned from your mom, how your mom
Yeah.
use what she knew to become an ambassador for veterans, and then you being the vice. I mean, the way that these things can be passed down and the good that can be done is so incredible. And,
Oh,
I want
I would never even know where to begin if I hadn't been working with my mom. I mean, period, end of story. I just probably would have gone on my way and been grateful for the improvement and, try to share hope somehow. But, it's,
yeah,
this has been I hear this from vets all the time too, that when, especially once they've gone through a bit of the healing process, but even if not, you know, um, enduring, and it is endure. I call them chronic pain warriors, really. Um, when you embattle chronic pain, when you're embattled with chronic pain and that experience, in the long run, it's one of the greatest. Oh God, I mean, I wish my family hadn't gone through what it had gone through. I regret that, but it has been one of the most valuable, life-changing, of course, but poignant experiences I've ever been through. And it's sitting here today, I wouldn't change it for anything in the world, because it simplifies life. You think like, I had dreamed of my career as a photographer, and it seemed so far away. And I started out doing headshots here in Los Angeles, and my kids' friends for free on Mother's Day, and those kinds of things. And then all of a sudden, I'm not to toot my own horn, but this is the irony in it all. I would literally was shooting $1 million weddings in Venice and being flown first class around the world, um, and but then and you think you're doing what's important, right?
right.
And yes, in some ways it was important. Their memories
Sure.
were important, and all of that. But then I wasn't seeing my family as much. I have 4 kids. I wanted to be with my babies. I somehow creating and completing a career was what was going to fulfill me.
Yeah.
And when I was stuck at home in bed with the same view out the same window and the same ceiling fan above me for 6, 7 years, and when there would be a moment in a day I was able to make it downstairs and sit outside, I would notice the little things, like the light coming through a leaf, the sunlight coming through a leaf, and the veins in the leaf, and the maze that it created, or the ladybug on it, or these things that seem trite. Although you appreciate them in everyday life, how often do you really focus on them? And so the fulfillment each and every day came from the smallest things. And there was a squirrel that started visiting every day, and we called him Rocky. And he would come, he would sit on a deck, or he would come, he'd go along the fence, skitter across the fence when I was sitting outside. And so named him Rocky, and ended up spending a year blogging. And I have a blog. My personal blog is friednervesandjam.com, that follows the entire journey through chronic pain, through the healing, through the stem cell treatments. But so there's a blog every day is what I did. Is I tried to think of one thing and write about it. And then one day I couldn't think of anything to write about. My mom's like, well, why don't you write about Rocky? So I'm thinking, okay, so I wrote about Rocky, and the blog went out, and there was such a response to it. People are like, this should be a children's book. And so then I'm thinking, okay, but it can't be about me. So how can I wanted it to have a purpose. And this is before everything else, before the treatment and all that stuff. And so I wrote a children's book that was published called The Soldier and the Squirrel. And it's about a newly injured soldier back at home, and how he has this relationship with this squirrel in the backyard. And it introduces children to the Purple Heart. But he discovers through this relationship with the squirrel the true meaning of life, which is to make each other happy, you know. And so that's that. But it's interesting when you're forced to be still, what you can birth without trying. And it's the most organic experience because it comes from a place where it's almost, when you're the funnel, you're just a funnel. And where it comes from, I don't know, but it's things you can be creative and not even know that that's a part of you. You discover things that you're able to do and create. And so that turned into a speaker series. So then we would take Purple Heart recipients from our Raw program, and we would go to schools, and they would read the book to classrooms and to children and to assemblies, and they would read the book, which created a relationship between the children and the veteran. And then afterwards he would tell his own story. And you talk about it's all relative, or oh, I wasn't hurt as bad as you were. Well, ultimately it was about reframing tragedy, and they would tell their story of resilience, what they'd been through, and then they would answer questions. There'd be a Q&A. And one of the children asked one time, what was the greatest thing that happened to you because of your journey? And he had lost both legs. And he said, right off the bat, he goes, the greatest blessing of my life has been my injury, because I was able to stay home and watch my children grow up.
Wow.
And he wouldn't have been able to do that before. So we kind of related it as well to the children, where it can be you're walking down the hallway and you have Mount Vesuvius on your forehead and you pass your crush. That's devastating, or you get hurt, or you break an arm or whatever. But whatever it is, it's your own worst.
Yeah.
Right?
So important.
It's your worst. It is all relative. I can't tell you how many times I do an intake with a veteran. They're like, they have PTSD or TBI or internal injuries, and they wish they'd lost a leg, or they wish they'd lost an arm, so somebody can see their pain and understand their limitations, or they hear my story, like, well, I'm not as bad as you. I'm like, anything that affects your quality of life can be devastating.
Yeah.
But then we also have this, the fight or flight syndrome. So are we going to curl up and die? Or are we going to simply wake up each day and move forward? Wake up the next day, move forward, like whatever that means for you. It could be making a phone call to a friend.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to ask you, or what, through your experience and the veterans that you talk to, what are those, the little motivating things to just do? A lot of times I just say, just do the next right thing when everything seems so overwhelming. What are some of those little motivating things? I love the writing. I'm a huge proponent. Like journaling and writing are among like the most healing things I think you can do, but that's been my experience. But what are some of those things that you help people find to just take that next step? I hope you're enjoying this conversation on What I Meant to Say, produced by my company, Be Better Media. To see the world of why we are striving to share inspired edutainment, I invite you to please check out our website, bebettermedia.tv. Here you will find all kinds of great stuff, from upcoming new productions to lifestyle products and services I personally use and endorse, to links to great books and other podcasts I love and recommend. Please check us out at bebettermedia.tv. That's bebettermedia.tv.
To take the next step, let's approach this now pragmatically. So strategically, logistically, if you go to veteransinpain.org, this is what we start with a lot of the time with our intake as well, with our intakes, veteran intakes, is go to veteransinpain.org and click on veteran directives. That is what I have curated throughout the last years, steps you can take today that can help eliminate inflammation in your body and help assist with chronic pain. The tangible decisions you can make. You don't need to make them all at once, but you can make one today. You can look at the anti-inflammatory diet and lifestyle, or, just things that you put in your mouth. 90% of pain is inflammation, period, end of story, right? So chronic pain is soft tissue based and inflammatory related. So 90% of pain is inflammation. So let's start there. It's so simple. So think about it. Anything that's a sugar that you put into your body, or anything that turns into a sugar. So whether you're eating sugar, you have a piece of candy, processed sugars, or if you're eating a lot of pasta, that's a carbohydrate that turns into sugar. Any type of sugar causes inflammation in your body and exacerbates inflammation in your body. So if you think about it, well, before my stem cell transplant, I loved a glass of white wine. Like that was my thing. I just, my husband would come home at night. I'd have a glass of Chardonnay, and so I'd have my wine after my stem cell transplant, which is a massive blast of anti-inflammatories as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
After my stem cell transplant, wine would burn my tongue every time, and then all of a sudden, I kind of wanted whiskey. I never had whiskey in my life. So it changed my taste buds a bit, which is kind of funny. That's the funny part. But then if I'd have a sip of whiskey, my spine would start to burn.
Oh my
So
God.
I had stopped sugar. I had stopped alcohol. My body didn't want it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you listen to your body, you'd be amazed what you can learn.
Yeah.
And we too often don't do that.
Well, think about what you said. I mean, the way that we live in this distracted culture, and what you were describing about being able to slow down, or being forced to slow down, and the things that you learned when you can't. We're moving around constantly, and a lot of times it is to distract us from, the things that are causing us pain, because it's hard to sit down and and sit with that pain. But the things that you learn, and then the ability to have an intention, because those kind of decisions are hard. It's hard for people to stop drinking. It's hard to not have ice cream after dinner. It's hard to, like, all of these one little choice, until it's like the motivation doesn't come first. It's like but when you start to feel better, then the motivation comes, right? I mean,
and it takes 28 days, right? The old 28-day rule takes 28 days to build a new habit. I kind of argue with that a little bit. I think it's 9 days. I think it's a week and a half, and you'll really start. You may feel miserable. The first 3 days are the hardest for anything.
Yep.
But just it's just day by day. I think that's the other thing, is you do learn to live day by day. Pressure's off.
Yeah.
The pressure's off. It's so simple. Just, what can I do today? What can I do in 2 hours, or not do in 2 hours? Just take it day by day. And it's interesting. You talk about let's talk about the overachiever. I was reading something the other day, and there is a direct correlation between overachievers and past trauma. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, I believe that.
Yes.
Makes sense.
So
Keep going.
And past traumas can exacerbate chronic pain levels. So that's been proven. So as far as a multidisciplinary approach, I think one of the most important aspects of that is pain psychology. Through the VA, our veterans may have psychotherapy, but when they're in psychotherapy, they're not allowed to speak about their pain, because it's a different medical condition. They can't talk about it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, that's mind-blowing to me.
Yeah. It's very true. And so when there's a direct correlation between past trauma and pain levels, and there's no awareness of it or support factor for it, then it's very difficult for that to ever be addressed. And that's a cornerstone of pain. And it doesn't mean at all that it's in your head. That's
No.
really important to reiterate. It's like a neurological connection, how your psychological well-being is connected into the
Yes.
wiring of your body.
Yes. I worked with a mentor, and one of the things that I really took away from the program was your biology becomes your psychology. So
Uh-huh.
how your, and then also just the understanding or lack thereof of the central nervous system and the way that our nervous system is creating a response, and then how do we, that window of tolerance that we can have for what's coming in. If we're chronically stressed, if we're in a lot of pain, that window of tolerance is tiny, right? So everything is
Right.
feeling worse and worse. How do we create an environment that allows us to sit and be a little more gentle with ourselves even when we're in pain? Because it's all connected. There's no way, you
Oh,
can't
that's so
separate it off like that. That doesn't make any sense.
that's
I
right.
just,
That's
yeah.
right.
And people, and you
Yeah,
look at the rise of autoimmune, that term is used all the time, and we're having such a hard time diagnosing it and for people to feel better. But can you just break down a little bit? Because I feel like we hear that word a lot, but just
sure.
describe what autoimmune response really is.
To simplify it as best I
Yeah.
can, it's when there is when your body is perceiving I want to say attack of some kind. Maybe that's a little bit strong a word for it, but an invasion of some kind. When you talk about Lyme disease, when you talk about, or if you talk about being, well, CRPS, it's a
Hmm.
caused by surgery or an injury where the body's perceiving an injury. And so it's when the body ends up actually by thinking that it's in self-preservation, it's actually attacking itself it, with the process of trying to save
Hmm.
itself. And how it does that is through protection for the body. Creating protection is creating inflammation. That's the response. And so when you have inflammation creates scar tissue, right? A
Yeah.
fascinating, and degradation and degeneration and all of those things then occur. It's cancer. It causes inflammation. Any type of disease is related to inflammation. It sounds like we're a broken record, and that all we keep talking about is inflammation in the body. But that's because we're trying to get people to listen that
Yeah.
it really is that simple. It's so
Yeah.
simple. It
Yeah.
has to do with eliminating or, decreasing as much as you can inflammatory effects within the body. You know,
Yeah.
there's a really interesting study. And if you go to veteransinpain.org and you click on our blog, at the very top is our YouTube channel. And there's a video in there by Dr. Sean Berman, PhD out of Beverly Hills. And he did a stem cell study on, he noticed that he had a group of veterans, and he noticed that like all of them suffered from PTSD. It lit up in the scans, their brains lit up in the scans in the exact same place in the central part of the brain. And, the inflammation buildup and then the scar tissue and the pressure on the brain and all of that. And yet half of them were never deployed or never experienced anything traumatic. For
Hmm.
PTSD to be diagnosed is, it's like, well, how did that happen then if they have a desk job in North Carolina? Well, the one common denominator that they all had was going through boot camp, going through training, and experiencing highly concussive randomized sounds over time. So
Hmm.
whether it's weaponry, gunfire, jet engines, any type of impact was his theory was that it was causing these inflammatory conditions within the brain because the brain is responding to
Yep.
the impact of the sound that literally has a physical impact on the brain. And even veterans were ending up with TBI lesions on the brain. And the doctor was saying, no, you had a concussion. He's like, I've never had a concussion, but he has a TBI lesion on the brain. So
Uh-huh.
what he did was he took rats and he put them in a clinical setting and exposed them to manufactured, highly concussive randomized sounds over time. And he noticed that when they scanned their brains, they lit up in the exact same place that it had lit up in the veterans' brains. So then he did an IV stem cell, mesenchymal stem cell treatment on the rats as well as the veterans. Within 6 weeks, virtually all of the inflammation within that region of the brain had dissipated, and their fight or flight was almost gone.
Oh my gosh.
So this approach to healing is also, mind you, it's the last resort for everybody. It was the last resort for me. And maybe rightly so, because we may not know a lot about it, or, you hear all these things, you don't know if they're true or not. So you wait, but they're the most conservative approach that you could ever have towards any type of degenerative injury. Everybody comes down with degenerative disc disease. They call it DDD, degenerative disc disease in their spine, but not until you're 70, 75. So, but when you get injured at a younger age, whatever it may be, 20, 25, or even 40, it launches that degenerative process early. Okay. So you end up feeling, and it takes on average 10 to 15 years for you to get to that point where you've tried everything else possible and now you don't know what to do. So then you start looking into these interventional solutions, right? And it's already pretty late, but it's amazing the effects they can have. Where if they initially were injured and then when they started experiencing symptoms, had access to PRP even. So PRP is platelet-rich plasma, right? So they extract your own blood, put it through a centrifuge, and they extract what's called a buffy coat. So it's yellow in color, and it's a serum, and it's so platelet-rich plasma. And then that is reintroduced through an injection into your joint or into your spinal area. And what a lot of people don't understand is not all regenerative procedures are stem cell. PRP is not stem cell. It has hyaluronic acids, growth factors, and proteins that when injected into a joint or the spine, this is the irony, it causes an inflammatory response, but a good one. And when that occurs, it's literally dictating to the damaged tissue to regenerate. So it doesn't create anything, but it helps create the situation within the joint or the spine, whereas the damaged tissue then is incited to regenerate. But if you look at bone marrow,
right?
What's that?
It also happens faster, right? So if I actually had that done in my knee when I tore my meniscus, and they said, yeah, you want to do this because it's gonna, you would be 4 to 6 weeks, like you're gonna be better in 2 or 3. I was like, sign me up. Let's try it.
Well, you can feel the results of it.
Yeah.
Some people have more pain in the beginning, and that lasts for maybe a couple weeks sometimes, and then the anti-inflammatory aspects will kick in. But on average, for any regenerative procedure, it takes 6 to 9 months to really get to the point of your new quality of life, whatever that's going to be because of the procedure. There's also bone marrow aspirate concentrate. I call it the Big Mac. It's BMAC is what it's known as.
Okay.
And that's where they extract. They do this very, very often when it comes to spine. So they most often start with BMAC when it comes to spine. Sometimes it's BMAC and PRP combo, but so it's where you're in an OR setting this time for sterility purposes. and it's not incredibly invasive. They do numb you up in the area of your iliac crest of your hip, and they have a needle that goes into that region of your bone and extracts bone marrow from that. And then that is used. They'll take that and then they'll inject that into the disc or the damaged area, and that's more stem cell related. But these procedures, I call recovering patients warriors as well,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to go in with an understanding of the unpredictability of the recovery. Absolutely no anti-inflammatories, no Motrin, no Advil, no NSAIDs for 2 weeks before and 3 weeks after. Why? Because the cells know where to go because of inflammation. If you're taking away the inflammation, they don't know where to
They
go.
don't have a map. Yeah.
And you can't get injured. You don't want to hurt that joint or that region of your body within 6 weeks of a procedure, because then you'll have acute inflammation. And like you said before, right, the
Yep.
cells won't go where they're needed. They're going to go there. But usually there's an initial inflammatory response. It can be very painful for a lot of people, but you want to use heat, no ice. And again, no anti-inflammatories. Tylenol is great. And you don't want to overexert anything with that joint or area of your body for a minimum of a month. No excessive bending, twisting. Don't go lifting weights. Don't go do anything like that. Again, creating acute inflammation, and it's going to distract from optimal results. But one of the greatest adjunct solutions to any regenerative procedure, it has been proven through our program over and over and over again. I cannot emphasize it enough. Even as a solo solution for PTSD and TBI, systemic inflammation, neurological conditions, is hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Period. End of story. I know a lot of people are hearing about it nowadays. They don't really understand it or know what it is. Well, I didn't either. And Dr. Carol Henricks, no D, she's our director of oxygen therapy. She's a neurologist and one of the top experts in the country on oxygen therapy. And she founded an organization called Healing Arizona Veterans, based out of Tucson, Arizona. I want everybody to share that information. It is TBI centric, the program, but it also treats systemic conditions by default. But so what they do is they have industrial medical chamber. It can sit 6, 7, 8 men inside, and they provide 40 to 60 days, sometimes 90, or we call them dives. So each session within a hyperbaric chamber is called a dive. You need to have the atmospheric pressure at a minimum of, for industrial chambers, 2.0. In-home chambers, soft shell chambers that you can purchase for in your home, that usually runs atmospheric pressure 1.4 or 1.6 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So in any case, it is completely pro bono for the veteran. It's about $50,000 worth of hyperbaric therapy, completely pro bono for veterans that are accepted into their program. So that's what got me interested.
And they sit together. You can fit multiple people in the chamber together. Wow.
Right. So it becomes a communal experience as well.
Exactly what I was thinking.
Right. And that's extremely important. When our vets go home, they've served their country, they've been discharged, they have their disability ratings, and they go home. They're alone. Yeah. There's very few veterans usually that they know or have access to in an in-person basis. And so it could be a very lonely experience. And so, even through our RAW program, we would have veterans come in together and we would have events for them just so they could be together. And it was Old Home Week every time. But to have that camaraderie during a healing process is absolutely invaluable, and the one thing also that I'm very grateful for my experience is that the first thing I tell a veteran, and each veteran, they fill out the application, the waiver, and then I have about an hour to an hour and a half phone call with each and every veteran. And the first thing I want them to know is that I understand, that I've been there, that they don't have to explain, to know that there is an immediate compassion and understanding on this end, and we can get to work, and we can find out how to approach your case comprehensively. And very often it's met with silence and then tears, because or they watch our origin video and they'll just call us and say that was the greatest gift to their life, because they saw themselves in someone else's story. It's very similar. A life challenge, a health challenge is a life challenge. That's it. They're all the same. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're divorced. It doesn't matter if you lose a loved one. It's suffering the stages of grief.
Yeah.
And it's a very difficult thing to do alone. And of course, at first, I remember when I first got in a wheelchair, I was angry. I was angry at the world. I was angry at people for stepping on me, literally tripping over my lap, or, we went, we were someplace and somebody had a cigarette and I'm at cigarette level, and it was like, I got ash around me. And so you have the anger, you have the denial, you have, you go, all those stages are the same, but most of all, out of all of them, it's suffering the death of who you used to be, of what your identity was. Who are you now? But it's also the death of your future, because everybody has a vision of what they just expect or know their life is going to be. It's like when you're married to someone, you get divorced, it's a death of a dream.
Yeah.
Well, for our veterans, it's a death of identity.
Yeah.
And so who are they now? Are they just their pain?
Yeah.
Healing is extremely empowering, because all of a sudden, I know for myself, and I know I hear this with our vets all the time, my purpose and meaning is no longer a question. And for anybody, this can be the case. It's a choice. So if you have received any healing in any way or capacity from your own personal challenge, or if you have gotten to the next stage, even if it's a small one, share that story with people around you, because there's the word hope.
Yeah.
And it's a verb, and it happens by sharing your experiences.
Awesome. Well, I cannot thank you enough for this conversation. I learned so much. I am so inspired by what you have done on your journey, and to help these veterans, and to help yourself and your family. And you're just an amazing beacon of hope. So thank you so much for this conversation. And to everybody watching, thank you for joining us. I'm Wendy Jones, and this is What I Meant to Say. And I'm here to remind you to just be real, be you, and be better. Thank you so much for listening to What I Meant to Say. If you enjoyed this conversation, you know what to do. Subscribe, rate, review. And for more great content, courses, and lifestyle, go to BeBetterMedia.tv. Some of these stories contain sensitive content about real-life events, and all of the information in this podcast and from anywhere on the Be Better Media website is for informational purposes only. If you find that you need help, which we all do from time to time, please reach out to a licensed professional for help.